Delegates, can I ask you all to resume your seats, please, for the Minister's address? Thank you very much. So, Iram Aran, Ara Foley, Laurthling, Anish, Mila Buechas.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Uachtarán a rúnaí generálta agus riúisle go léir is an ormhór domsa mar ar I dachas bhehansa agus bhile mar dús má bhhaachas a gháil ocht an ama agus an deisio chuirtam chun búlaliv agus chun leirtliv inniuh. I am so very pleased to have the opportunity to be here today in Wexford. It truly is wonderful to be here in person this year and see the return to the great buzz of excitement and anticipation surrounding the Easter Education Conferences. Thank you to your President, Marjoram, and your General Secretary, Michael Gillespie, for the kind invitation and indeed the opportunity to speak with you here today. There is no doubt but that the education system and Irish society in general are now at a turning point. We have come through, together with the rest of the world, a collective trauma. It has been a challenging, difficult, and demanding 2 years for everyone. However, what became very apparent very early in the pandemic was the central role that schools play in families' lives, especially when that role was removed or diminished through school closures and severe restrictions. There is no doubt but that social and emotional health and well-being are inextricably tied up with access to school for children and young people. In facilitating the continuation of educational services throughout the pandemic, teachers and principals have provided enormous public service for this country. School communities responded to the crisis with energy, commitment, flexibility and professionalism, and I do want to thank you for that. It was not just the day-to-day attendance at school that suffered as the pandemic surged. Important milestones that we took for granted, graduations, DEBs, and of course, state examinations were all impacted. Difficult decisions had to be taken and indeed implemented. But we worked in partnership, and all of us in this room demonstrated an extraordinary ability to adapt even when everything around us was in a constant state of flux. I would like to pay warm tribute to the TUI and the leadership that the executive and all of the individual members showed in this time of adversity. First, calculated grades, followed by accredited grades, and then a slow march, as it were, back to holding in-person examinations. I assure you, I am mindful of your goodwill, and I commit to engaging closely with you as we seek to meet the challenges of the 21st century in Irish education. The public service ethos, which was a hallmark of the past 2 years, is again shining through with the welcome that schools up and down the country are showing to those families in great need and hardship who have come from the Ukraine. The trade union movement has always played a hugely significant role in terms of social conscience and helping the most vulnerable. I know that the teaching and other unions involved in the education sector have thrown themselves foursquare behind efforts to address this humanitarian crisis. I am determined that supports for schools will be put in place so that we in the education sector together can offer the hand of friendship, support, and solidarity to the young people of Ukraine. Coming through the pandemic, there are learnings that will help us through this new phase, both in recovery from the lasting effects of the pandemic and with managing new demands arising from the humanitarian crisis. Together, we have learned the power and the value of the collective voice and collective effort, innovation and agility, well-being and resilience. It is important to celebrate and acknowledge this collective national effort as we reach calmer waters that will allow us, hopefully, to return to the fuller richness of school life that had, by necessity, become restricted this past 2 years. As I mentioned earlier, the strength of school communities was thrown into sharp relief by the vicissitudes of COVID-19. But I must also acknowledge where fault lines emerged as we worked to respond to the crisis. Consideration of the strengths and weaknesses of the current system allowed me to clarify where I want to see the school system evolving and how we can work together to co-design and implement change for the benefit of all of our students. Today, I would like the opportunity to set out my agenda in terms of addressing some key objectives for future development, such as reforming teaching, learning and assessment at senior cycle, creating and resourcing more digitally aware schools, strengthening and supporting leadership in our schools, underpinning greater engagement, communication and collaboration within the school community, and building inclusive school communities for all. Delegates here today and yesterday have reflected on the announcement I made at the end of March for a reimagined senior cycle. The vision I outlined is based on 3 key objectives: to empower students to meet the challenges of the 21st century, to enrich the student experience and build on what's strong in the current system, and to embed well-being and reduce student stress levels. For the benefit of all our students, both now and in the future, it is important to bring that vision to life. To do so will require each one of us to be part of the process to build the next stage in our country's education history. I am conscious that in introducing significant change at senior cycle, it is essential that the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment, State Examinations Commission, the Teacher Support Services, the department and schools, including you as teachers, can work through the changes together over a period of time. Senior cycle redevelopment must address the diversity of students' learning needs and strengths. It must provide accessible and equally valued learning pathways in school, and we must broaden the ways we assess and accredit students' achievements. And I fully recognise that we must also make sure that the conditions for change are in place. I am determined that the curriculum design and teacher professional development will support the use of a broader range of methodologies and learning experiences. I strongly believe that it is essential for teachers to be involved in co-designing our curricular and assessment approach, and I will facilitate the allocation of time and professional development to enable this to happen. We will learn lessons from previous experiences and other systems in this regard, and the NCCA has been asked to conduct research, including a consultation process with teachers, to better inform us of what is needed for improved professional support. We will ensure that the teacher supports are developed and delivered to you as teachers ahead of introducing the revised arrangements. We will together design and build a system for Ireland that is made in Ireland for Irish students, but one which harnesses experiences internationally and the professional and other experiences gained here at home. I know that in moving to externally moderated, teacher-based forms of assessment, some teachers will have concerns or indeed reservations. I do understand that. I can say that the NCCA and the State Examinations Commission will have extensive engagement with teachers and other stakeholders as this work progresses. And we will rely on the use of a network schools approach to introduce this aspect of senior cycle development, which will allow space for each element of the curriculum to be carefully worked through. There is no doubt but that teacher assessments broadens the range of skills or types of learnings that can be assessed. We must ensure that the additional components are adding that value by ensuring that they do test additional and different skills beyond those already tested by written examinations. We must also ensure in the design of teacher assessment and other additional components that we will ensure that there is equity for all students and that students with different talents, attributes, skills and behaviours have genuine opportunities to be rewarded for them in the exam system. We can look to those examples internationally, look at how they might be adopted for our schools and students, or how they might form part of the Irish approach. There are also lessons to be learned internationally that tell us we must align curricular and assessment evolution, and that we must support teachers and students as they evolve their teaching. To do this, we need to move past traditional forms of consultation and into active co-construction. Adopting the network schools approach offers a tangible example of our commitment to co-construction. The NCCA will invite a selection of schools, representative of different types and sizes of schools, to become network schools. In this way, we can work out the issues, the questions, the concerns, but also embrace the opportunities to ensure we serve all of our students through this approach. I am aware that some schools, in fact, have already sought to become network schools. The network schools will be supported in their participation in the network, including through ensuring teachers and school leaders have the time to engage with the new approaches, and that the schools have the required teachers in place to offer the new subjects. One of the great strengths of the education system has had over the last 2 years in particular is the commitment and willingness to engage with what has been really difficult challenges. This is a huge asset that will stand to us again in this work. I also want to be very clear in saying that the alternative arrangements in place in the last 2 years, calculated grades and accredited grades, served us well at that time, but are not what is envisaged for teacher assessment in the redeveloped senior cycle. Put simply, we are not introducing accredited grades in place of the current Leaving Certificate examinations. There are important differences. Accredited grades accounted for 100% of marks the student received. Teacher assessment will not. Due to the pandemic, we did not have the time or space to work with you as teachers to develop the system. Through network schools, we will co-construct teacher assessment with you. Again, due to the pandemic, we could not provide the professional support and development that we would want. We will provide you with the necessary CPD. And finally, we did not have the opportunity to evaluate our approach by introducing those arrangements in a phased way. The network schools approach by design allows us to address this element. I know too, as a teacher, that you will all be very conscious of the need to protect the relationships at school level that you have with your students. Again, we can see internationally that these relationships can be protected and strengthened. There will be safeguards and a balance to be struck in how both the teacher and the student are protected in a teacher assessment model. It is also unquestionably the case that significant resources will need to be made available to teachers in schools to ensure the success of redeveloping senior cycle. I fully recognise that schools and teachers must be resourced to have the facilities, supports, and time to do this work. We must resource the new subjects, the expansion of transition year availability, the integration of the senior cycle programmes, and of course, new assessment approaches. The expansion and revision of transition year gives a real opportunity to improve the equity for all students by developing new ways to access work experience, for example, or to sample different further training or apprenticeship options. Offering more students access to elements of the different programmes needs to be resourced to make it a reality. There are strengths in the Leaving Certificate Applied programme or the LCVP programme that Leaving Certificate established students would benefit from. And to maximise the pathways beyond school for Leaving Certificate Applied students in particular, access to Leaving Certificate established mathematics opens up opportunities currently not available to them. These are the practical and real measures that give meaning to empowering students by giving them choices, enriching student experience by making it more equitable and meaningful, and embedding well-being because the student can feel more confident in themselves and in their futures. Teachers must have additional time to their class contact time to engage in curriculum and professional development. Government is committed to putting those resources in place. As the redevelopment of senior cycle takes shape, we must ensure that we support its realisation and support teachers and school leaders on this journey. The demand for a redeveloped senior cycle has been a growing demand in recent times from all sectors of society, including teaching unions. We now have in place the foundations on which to deliver the senior cycle reform. Finally, as regards the senior cycle, I want to say that we will be looking very carefully with the State Examinations Commission and others at how the great inflation seen in the most recent years can be addressed in a manner that is fair to all students and which respects the integrity of the Leaving Certificate marking arrangements each year. The Leaving Certificate class of 2022 have the assurance that their grades will be at least on a par with the class of 2021. And we must also now examine how best to deliver a fair and equitable grade profile in the coming years too. I know from past experience that the TUI always engages positively and constructively in conversations we have about our education system and its future direction. While we may not always agree on everything, I greatly admire the sincerity, reflective insight, and genuinely held conviction with which TUI members and their leadership always approach issues. It is a huge strength which ensures the regard in which the TUI is held in Irish society. Turning to another topic, as we can see in our daily lives, the use of digital technologies is transforming the way we live, the way we receive information, the way we learn, and the way we express ourselves. It allowed school communities to continue to teach and learn throughout school closures. In fact, studies have shown that where schools had an existing, established approach to using digital technologies in their learning, these schools were particularly well equipped to move to online platforms quickly and effectively. Whilst the Department of Education has provided extensive support and advice for school leaders and teachers to ensure continuity of learning, a great many schools, teachers and students have shown enormous innovation in embracing learning platforms, digital resources, applications, and different modes of learning. Given that the further development of digital skills for students, teachers, and school leaders will continue to be a priority for the department, as well as the improvement of broadband connectivity, last week I launched the Digital Strategy for Schools 2027. The importance of the effective use of digital technologies in our school system is key to delivering the skills needed for our current and future leaders. This requires the department and its support services to continue to ensure that teachers and school leaders have access to the necessary supports and resources to facilitate this. An extensive consultation process was undertaken to inform the development of this strategy. And I want to thank all of you who contributed, both to the wider process and to the consultative process group on which you were represented. All of the areas raised were taken into consideration in the development of this new strategy. As you are aware, there is some €200 million in capital investment underpinning the strategy, and €50 million in ICT grant funding has already issued to all schools. Through continued investment, we will also ensure that all schools, regardless of location, are provided with appropriate broadband connectivity. I look forward to continued engagement working on this important issue. I am conscious the kind of fundamental change that I have described thus far this afternoon will not come about without investment and the strengthening of leadership and professional supports in our schools. Providing opportunities for all teachers to engage in leadership activity early in their careers is an essential component in developing future school leaders. We witnessed throughout the pandemic the huge reliance on our school principals and deputy principals to deliver on every aspect of school activity and school life. I believe that strengthening leadership and supporting those in leadership is crucial for the future development and reform of our education system. The department is continuing to fund the provision of a wide range of supports for school leaders, including the professional development services for teachers and the Centre for School Leadership. Professional coaching support, mentoring and dedicated CPD support programmes are available to all school principals, and the coaching supports have recently been extended to deputy principals on a pilot basis. Aspiring school leaders continue to have access to the postgraduate diploma in school leadership, which is part funded by the Department of Education. We know that we must attract, support, and retain the best people to be school leaders. That's why I believe it is important we encourage potential leaders to undertake leadership qualifications either before recruitment as school leaders or during the early stages of their service as school leaders. The Centre for School Leadership is already active in this space. In terms of supporting the profession more broadly, there are a number of reforms which are intended to support the initial professional formation and the ongoing professional development of teachers. The NCCA RSE review report in 2019 highlighted that professional development of educators is a critical factor in supporting an improvement in the quality of relationships and sexuality education. The learning for participants will be grounded in an approach that affirms the right of children and young people to comprehensively understand SPHE and RSE. And I am pleased that this new diploma course that I am launching will be offered to all teachers, and the funding for same will be covered by the Department of Education. Whilst the acquisition of specialist knowledge is important, the development of other core competencies particular to teaching SPHE and RSE are equally critical. In this context, a focus on teachers' own personal development and on the development of a skill set that is needed for the SPHE RSE classroom is a key requirement of any upskilling course. all modules should take cognizance of the relationship between these three core competencies: personal development, skills, and knowledge. The department also promotes the quality of teaching and learning through the provision of continuing professional development and supports for teachers and school leaders. The professional development needs of teachers are met through the provision of an induction programme for newly qualified teachers, dedicated support for school leaders, national CPD for curriculum and policy reform, and ongoing support for teachers. The integration of 4 different support services into one single service is now underway. This should provide a more coherent and streamlined experience for teachers with a one-stop type approach. I acknowledge the issues exacerbated by COVID-19 substitution pressures that have faced schools in filling posts, particularly in certain subjects at post-primary level. This is a combination of various factors being addressed by the Teacher Supply Action Plan. There are positive signs with an increased interest in the CAO for post-primary teaching this year. I will continue to work with the TUI and other unions to implement pragmatic ways of addressing this issue. It is of the utmost importance to me personally and to this government that we achieve a fairer, more inclusive and compassionate society, and that spirit, I believe, should also pervade our schools. I believe it is important that children with special educational needs should be included where possible and appropriate in mainstream settings. But to be fair to school communities, this should go hand in hand with coherent strategies and resourcing to support and help students and staff in this context. Funding is, of course, hugely important, and the department this year will spend over €2 billion, or over 25% of its total educational budget, on providing additional supports for children with special educational needs. This helps to support children in mainstream classrooms and to provide for circumstances where children require more specialised interventions, special school or special class places. To make sure our policy and statutory framework appropriately reflects current needs, the Epson Act is to be reviewed. This review will help ensure that our laws reflect current policy and international norms on provision and inclusion. There are now 607 special classes at post-primary level, and demand is likely to grow further. I will ensure that the necessary teaching and SNA supports are provided to support the placement of young people in post-primary schools. It is a tribute to post-primary schools and their staff that so many children and young people are being supported in their learning, both during the school year and in the hugely expanded summer education programme that was put in place last year. For the Summer 21 programme, eligibility criteria was extended to include post-primary children with complex needs and children at risk of educational disadvantage. As a result, significantly more children than ever before benefited from the programme. Planning work for the 2022 summer programme is ongoing, and the department will be consulting with education partners in the coming weeks. Staying on the broader topic of inclusion, I think we would all agree that education has the power to transform lives. Every child and young person should receive the support they need in order to develop and thrive, and I have sought to increase the supports available to achieve that aim. Last month, I announced a major expansion of the DESH programme that will see the DESH programme extended to an additional 310 schools at a cost of €32 million in 2023. As a result of this expansion, almost 1,200 schools will be included in the DESH programme, serving over 240,000 students from September 2022. The current level of funding provided to DESH schools highlights the government's commitment to ensuring education becomes a proven pathway to better opportunities for all learners, especially those at risk of not maximising the benefits of education. We know through recently published research by the department that DEIS works. Since its introduction, the gap in retention rates through Leaving Certificate between DEIS and non-DEIS schools has narrowed from a gap of 16.8% for the 2001 entry cohort to approximately 8.6% for the 2014 cohort. I hope to build on these measures in future years to ensure that every child, regardless of his or her own circumstances, can access all that education has to offer. I have spoken today about the huge challenges faced and overcome by Irish society in general and the school system in particular over the last 2 years. As we emerge from that crisis, we are now faced with another great challenge as a consequence of the war in Ukraine. I do believe we as a country are mindful of the wisdom of the Iranian-American novelist Dina Nayeri, who tells us that, and I quote, "It is the obligation of every person born in a safer room to open the door when someone in danger knocks," unquote. Irish people, the length and breadth of this country, are answering that call. Likewise, the Department of Education is working with all relevant authorities, education partners and school communities to ensure Ukrainian children of school-going age are provided with access to appropriate supports to allow them to continue their education in Ireland. Our schools are already warmly welcoming children who have arrived from Ukraine. In tandem with this, the department has also commenced strategic planning for the potentially large numbers of children that may arrive in Ireland so that we can fully leverage existing capacity in our public services to meet the needs of these people. The department has moved to source a number of immediate resources and supports developed by the NCCA, NEPs and other bodies to support linguistically and culturally diverse communities in Ireland, and these are being centralised for easy access. The department is working collaboratively with the Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science to finalise arrangements with ETBs to put in place arrangements after Easter for the recruitment of tutors for panels to support English for speakers of other language tuition. These measures will support adults and post-primary students from Ukraine in their English language development. Panels will be in place in every ETB area to support all post-primary schools where needs arise. The ETBs are also hosting new regional interagency regional education and language teams, or RAILT teams, and I would like to thank the TUI for their cooperation in this respect. We know from the OECD that it is important for young people arriving in these circumstances to be welcomed and integrated insofar as possible, and that an holistic, supportive approach to their educational and pastoral needs should be the hallmark of their treatment. We, as a country, continue to welcome and support people fleeing from this terrible violence, and I commend and acknowledge the work of people across society to help Ukrainian families. I know all of you will join with me in expressing our shared solidarity and support for the people of Ukraine at this time. In conclusion, I would like to wish you every success with your Congress. You have an enormous range of motions reflecting the concerns of delegates and the wider membership. These range from individual concerns about the cost of living and the pressures on families in Ireland at the current time. The government is aware and alive to these pressures and is determinedly working on how to build on the already significant package of more than €2 billion announced to alleviate these difficult hardships. In terms of public service pay more generally, building momentum has provided opportunities through sectoral bargaining to address some of the outstanding issues being pursued by your union throughout some of the last number of years. The fund for post-primary teachers will be used in part to restore the PME allowance for newer teachers. My colleague, Minister Michael McGrath, has also indicated that negotiations for a new agreement or extension of building momentum will begin shortly, and indeed, preliminary discussions have already taken place. Without doubt, the Irish education system is now at a critical juncture as we seek to empower our students to both meet and embrace the challenges of the 21st century. Plato reminds us that nothing ever is, it is always becoming. We in the education sector cannot and must not stand still if our students are to meet the challenges of our time and of the future. We are, each one of us, called upon to provide for an education system that will both support and encourage our students to become the very best that they can be. As I conclude, may I wish the TUI every success for the next 40 years, and may I say clearly and sincerely, I look forward to working with you on an ongoing basis as a highly valued education partner. Guim gach rá bhur obair sa agus as sa hamach, gur míle maith agaibh go léir.
Mágad ara, Tommy Dan buíochas a méid sin agus inis ire mar uachtarán intas múntóirí na Héireann, Martin Marjoram, Fragra a Horton ara.
Thank you, Vice President, delegates. Minister, you are very welcome to our Congress. And on behalf of the TUI's 20,000 members, I thank you for accepting our invitation to attend and to address us. We acknowledge our shared interest in education as the great driver of equality and social cohesion. The TUI looks forward to continuing to work with you and officials from your department in that great enterprise, with many ambitions and positions in common. And I extend our welcome and thanks to those officials here present. We welcome your positive words, Minister, about the TUI's professionalism and our sincerity. While not always agreeing with the OECD, the TUI can find no fault with this from their latest report. Giving everyone a fair chance to obtain a high-quality education is a fundamental part of the social contract. To improve social mobility and socio-economic outcomes, it is critically important to eliminate inequalities in educational opportunities. Minister, with those aims in mind, Ireland does not spend enough on education. Last out of 36 countries in the OECD in terms of how much of national wealth is spent on second-level education is lamentable. As a nation, we have always valued education historically and culturally. We need to start demonstrating that value in real terms. What better use of a nation's resources than investment in the genius and in the future of its people? Increased teacher allocations in response to the pandemic were welcome and necessary. They must be continued and added to. Demographics and our duty to cherish all of our children equally dictate the need for ongoing increases. The contrast between our enormous class sizes and those in jurisdictions which command similar resources was marked, and it should be a source of shame, as well as a rallying cry for improvement. Can anyone seriously suggest there is no connection between our staffing and infrastructural deficits at second level and our spend of less than 60% of the OECD's average amount of national wealth? For the sake of our children and our future, we must eliminate that gap. Minister, you've repeatedly acknowledged the extraordinary efforts and exemplary work of teachers in keeping education operating during COVID-19. For all that was achieved, we are deeply conscious of the inequalities experienced by students, with the greatest educational losses suffered by those already most disadvantaged. Our many decades of underachievement were acutely felt and existing inequalities magnified, with the extent of continued engagement in education depending hugely on home circumstances and resources and the availability of devices and reliable broadband. The class hours were well-intentioned, but the educational loss suffered will only be made up by a more fundamental response, again involving extra allocations, including for team teaching and additional supports and resource hours. We agree with you, Minister, that DESH works. The addition of a further 37 post-primary schools in the DESH scheme is good news, but it would have been even better if accompanied by a positive response to our repeated call that deputy principals in DESH schools be ex-quota. And sometimes, Minister, it is the little things. For allocations to be notified to schools in mid-April, when we still remember the years when they were announced before the end of January, is disrespectful to our principal teachers and does little to help school planning for the next year. All the worse for the communication to issue during the Easter holidays of principals who have worked through the most unrelenting and hectic 2 years imaginable. And Minister, inequalities between different school sectors, which affect teacher recruitment and teacher numbers, must be removed. ETB schools cannot be disadvantaged anymore regarding either allocations or the inferior payment regime for fully qualified teachers operating out of field. This last issue has been an agenda item for the Teachers' Conciliation Council for years, and the failure so far to have it addressed, the perfect illustration of the ineffectiveness of that forum and the need for its operation to be significantly energised. Despite the best efforts of an excellent chair, issues drift for months and years or lie endlessly under the cold hand of the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. The excellent solution-focused engagements which allowed fast, necessary decisions in response to COVID-19 provide the model for future engagement. Processing claims and solving long-standing issues for teachers benefit the entire system and must be afforded the urgency and respect of the prompt and efficient resolution we now know is possible. The TUI welcomes that a similar format for engagement as for the pandemic has commenced in order that families fleeing to Ireland to escape Putin's bloody and barbaric assault on the Ukrainian people can have the best possible education for their children. Our members have already begun to play their role in this great national effort. The potential strain on the school system and the resources required may well turn out to be unprecedented. We in the TUI will engage constructively and actively to see all available capacity and resources employed towards this vital task. Thus far, and hopefully up to the summer, the indications are that the system can accommodate those needing a school place. What is crucial is that all necessary preparations and resources are ready for September, so the teachers and students have certainty and confidence in the necessary additionality and support, including language and psychological services. As you know, Minister, a number of our members were employed by the Kerry Diocesan Youth Service providing Youth Reach services. This service was funded through Kerry Education Service and then Kerry ETB, using a grant from your department under an arrangement requiring a defined benefit pension scheme no less favourable than that available in the public service. Recent correspondence from our legal advisors made clear to you that that scheme is now under threat. Minister, you and your department have a moral responsibility to intercede, to ensure commitments made in relation to our members' pension scheme are honoured. Equally, Minister, you have a responsibility to these members, your constituents and members of your electorate, to secure a pension in respect of their employment with KDYS, no less favourable than would apply had they been directly employed by a VEC or ETB. As you noted, Minister, from the 1st of February, almost all public servants will benefit from the middle of 1% pay increases under Building Momentum. That agreement provided for unions instead to use some or all of that middle 1% to pay for outstanding claims and adjudications in a process called sectoral bargaining. The first thing to say about sectoral bargaining is that it is deeply unjust. It stands as an appalling indictment of successive governments that there were such attacks on the education professions during and following the austerity era. It is an appalling indictment of this government that remedy for the damage wrought rests with us, that we should have to divert our money, long overdue to us in offsetting inflation, into footing the bill for necessary repairs to our profession, which by any ethical standard rightly rest with government. Once done with, our fervent wish, Minister, is never to see sectoral bargaining again. However, as said too often in the last 15 years, we are where we are. We in the TUI will stand for pay discrimination no longer. We are determined to seize this opportunity. However flawed the mechanism by which it's offered, at long last to remove this blight from the teaching profession. Our key objectives are costed by your officials and demonstrated to lie within the scope of the available fund. One of these is now agreed, which is the restoration of the HDIP or PME allowance for obtaining by 6 years of hard graft in most cases what is now the essential qualification for admission to the profession. The TUI position to restore the PME allowance was communicated early in the discussions to department officials last year. Respectful, as always, of the decision-making processes of our sister union, we are delighted that the ASTI has now come to the same position. The destination of about 2/3 of our shared fund is now decided and in the best way possible. Next on our list, and well within the remaining resource made available by our members, is a return to entry at point 3 of the salary scale for fully qualified teachers, in recognition of the costly, unpaid years spent training for the profession. Many have forgotten, but the TUI has not. Before the Teaching Council, teachers who had completed a degree commenced on point 2, and those who went on to complete a 1-year HDIP commenced on point 3. The minimum requirement to even enter the profession now takes longer to achieve, costs more, and involves more time in the classroom. The TUI's unequivocal position is that our new and recent entrants have already earned at least these increments by the time they graduate. In our survey of members directly before this Congress, almost half of teachers suffering pay discrimination see its removal as the determining factor which will keep them in the profession. A stark finding, Minister, in the face of a teacher supply crisis. The TUI's campaigning, industrial action and negotiations have served to reduce the career loss for teachers under austerity attacks from a monstrous €500,000 to about €80,000 as of last week, down to about 30,000 with the PME allowance secured. We must complete the journey, Minister, and the TUI and its members have not only signposted the way, we're paying the fare. It is altogether fitting and proper for us to do this. That we in the TUI demonstrate this solidarity with our colleagues, which is at the core of our values. What is neither fitting nor proper is the abdication of responsibility by the department and by government for the welfare of the teachers suffering this disgraceful discrimination and for its damage to the teaching profession itself. No more foot dragging from the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform should be allowed to delay the righting of what was always so manifestly wrong. We need sign-off on the restoration of the PME allowance and entry at point 3 of the scale restored. Pay equality for teachers is finally within our grasp, paid for by us. We insist, Minister, that you do all in your power to drive it home. And lest there be any doubt, Minister, once pay equality is achieved, the TUI will move decisively to address the gaping injustice of the inferior pension imposed since 2013 as well. modest pay rises of building momentum are more than swallowed up by inflation. Minister, national pay policy must address legitimate public sector demands regarding the cost of living, made all the worse by the housing crisis putting both rents and home ownership out of the reach of many teachers. The realities of the recruitment and retention crisis in teaching are all too well known and brought into even sharper relief by the pandemic. A TUI survey before Christmas, with the assistance of our Principals and Deputy Principals Association, showed 98% of schools experiencing recruitment difficulties in the previous 6 months. The grim prospects for young teachers in establishing their place in the world are darkened by the twin shadows of discriminatory pay and the housing crisis. The embedded, reprehensible reluctance to make ab initio permanent appointments adds casualisation, often on less than full hours, to the list of disincentives, growing still further the numbers of Irish teachers whose place in the world will regrettably be somewhere else in the world, somewhere with better pay, better prospects, and no discrimination. The action plan on teacher supply, which you referenced, Minister, has signally failed to supply teachers in anything like the numbers required. The time has come for the removal of all impediments to getting the best qualified into the profession as a matter of real urgency. The TUI is doing its part, with our members funding the removal of the last vestiges of pay discrimination. The second year of the Professional Masters in Education must also be removed. This expensive extravagance is not only costly for student teachers themselves, both in fees and in a year of lost earnings, it is enormously costly to the system in further disincentivizing the profession and in undue burdens from creating necessary placement, none of which costs can be justified by the modest value this second year may add. During austerity, our education system was further sabotaged by the evisceration of middle management structures. Your words about qualifications in school leadership are welcome, but surely they can only lead to frustration where there is no post to apply for. The loss of posts of responsibility is felt across the school community, not least in its negative impact on provision of pastoral care needs for our students. The disappearance for so long of a realistic career path inflicts still more damage on teaching as an attractive profession, while it is deeply unhelpful to schools as principals and deputy principals are appointed without valuable middle management experience. The requirement for posts is highlighted by the lists of unmet needs in schools across the country, while ever-increasing bureaucratic and accountability demands stretch beyond breaking the resources currently in place. In survey after survey, reinforced only last month, our members report paperwork and administrative duties interfering with the core activity of teaching. Teaching in Ireland is becoming marked by ever-increasing intensity, accompanied by a diminishing sense of control over the working environment, poisoned further by discrimination in pay and pensions. This is not the recipe for job satisfaction or a healthy profession. There are reasons for the crisis in recruitment and retention, for the continuing loss of talented teachers overseas and to other careers, for the struggle to attract entrants, notably males, into the profession. We have spelled out the remedies, Minister, and they are in your hands, in the hands of government. We urge you to act on them. Minister, it is important on behalf of members that I address the state examinations. Given its vexed and difficult evolution and the overriding importance the TUI attaches to its hard-won agreements, we insist as ever on continuing commitment to the 2015 Junior Cycle Implementation Agreement and emphasise again the need for complete review. Yesterday's debate saw Congress bring forward significant concerns about over-assessment, which the review must address. Our state examinations are one of the few institutions of the state which command such trust and confidence. Our history and current affairs are littered with the proof that who you know is and always has been far too important in determining life chances in Ireland. And vital concerns free of that stain must be upheld. Minister, at last year's Congress, I was happy to acknowledge your public recognition of the no-precedent nature of the assessment arrangements forced upon us by the necessities of the pandemic. Extraordinary efforts by teachers enabled tens of thousands of young people to progress with their lives and to commence apprenticeships, employment, and further in higher education. The trust and credibility of the system and of those young people's qualifications were retained, but in our view by a narrow margin, and with the edges becoming increasingly frayed as we moved into an unnecessary second year of teachers assessing their own students, by contrast with the clear necessity for the first. The view now that no precedent necessity was in fact an opportunity for so-called learnings is a source of grave concern and smacks of opportunism. What was given in good faith for the good of our students, contrary to deeply held principles and with an acute sense of unease and disquiet, cannot now be exploited against both us and the reliability and trustworthiness of the system. The National Council for Curriculum and Assessment, a statutory body of your department, consulted and deliberated for years with regard to the review of the Leaving Certificate. Their report rested with you for 9 months, Minister, with all involved awaiting your decisions. It is important to highlight the positive nature of much that was announced, the necessity, indeed, the duty to build on the valuable experience in junior cycle of Level 1 and Level 2 learning programmes with appropriate follow-on modules for the students cater for, was sought by the TUI and is hugely welcome. You and all involved are to be commended on this vital commitment to our children with special educational needs. The same applies to the provision of the opportunity to all children to participate in transition year. The removal of the barriers between Leaving Certificate Applied and the Leaving Certificate Vocational Programme and the rest of the Leaving Cert cannot come soon enough for us. And we've pointed out for some time the impediments created for LCA students from lack of access to mathematics in particular. The TUI has always supported additional components in providing opportunities for students to fully display the range of their abilities and achievements, and in removing some of the focus from the terminal examination. 27 of 41 Leaving Certificate subjects already feature at least one additional component of assessment, and we favour more, provided, of course, that they are appropriate to the subject, measure proficiencies which cannot be measured in the written examination, and most importantly, are externally assessed by the State Examinations Commission. You've acknowledged, Minister, the need for significant additional resources to implement your plans. We hope your announcement signals real intent that those resources will follow, and we are happy to see the inclusion of professional time for teachers. However, it is the unilateral elements in your announcement, absent from the recommendations of the NCCA, that are truly troubling, Minister. In what is now described in the press as an interim measure, Paper 1 in Irish and English will move to the end of 5th year, while 2 new subjects are to be introduced out of the blue as far as the NCCA and other stakeholders are concerned. Minister, though well-intentioned, the potential impacts of such change need the scrutiny and consideration of the dedicated statutory body before they are announced, not after. Educationalist Paulo Freire cautioned that reflection and action must never be undertaken independently. The very announcement of such changes is a hugely significant action on which no one in the profession had any opportunity for reflection at all, on the impact of the new subjects on existing ones, the pedagogic soundness of the new Paper 1 timings, or on whether those timings might increase instead of reduce pressure. The manner and the timing, as well as the nature of your announcement, might have been designed to provoke opposition, Just as teachers, in another no-precedent COVID response, were about to give up a large part of their Easter to facilitate orals and practicals, it was announced with no prior consultation that this arrangement is now permanent. For all your years in the classroom, we fear, Minister, that your reflections over those 9 months with the report were not informed by actions and realities on the ground, and particularly with regard to the announcement of so-called teacher-based assessment, for an all too familiar sounding 40% for those who came through the junior cycle dispute. In numerous interviews, Minister, you and government colleagues have been asked whether teacher-based assessment was included in the NCCA recommendations or was subject to prior consultation. Since neither you nor your colleagues seem to be able to answer those questions, let me help you. The answer to both questions is no. Teacher-based assessment was not in the NCCA recommendations. There was no prior consultation. And we would greatly appreciate if you would impart that to your colleagues as well. When your predecessor went against NCCA advice, then Minister Joe McHugh said, "I made history compulsory so that future generations can learn how to avoid the mistakes of the past." If only your department could learn to avoid the mistakes of the past, Minister. The TUI's opposition to teachers marking their own students for state certification has not diminished, and indeed has just this morning received another ringing, indeed unanimous confirmation. The change in the student-teacher relationship arising from such assessment is profound. Our advocacy for our students, the sense of common purpose with them in achieving their full potential, is immensely valuable. In spite of the threadbare nature of our education budget, Ireland is literally the best in the world at keeping children in school past the age of 15, very largely on the basis of that relationship. It must not be sacrificed for what looks to us to be either ideology or ill-considered grafting of practice from other cultures and jurisdictions onto an Irish context, where it is alien and inappropriate. Additional components of assessment running successfully are externally assessed. Why undermine what is working or look for a different model when the obvious answer is already before us? There are indeed learnings from teacher assessment in calculated and accredited grades, Minister. Don't go there unless you absolutely must. We recall the legal challenges and the court cases. The pressure placed on teachers was immense in some cases. A number are still ostracised by parents who have convinced themselves of some wrongdoing against their child. Grade inflation ballooned alarmingly, including a 6-fold increase in the numbers achieving maximum points, an inevitable consequence which will require careful unwinding. For some students, every assessment and homework became high stakes. Not an opportunity to learn and develop, but a step in influencing the teacher towards a high mark. In other words, a fundamental undermining of education and the exact opposite of your stated intention to reduce pressure. In the thankfully rare instances where we were aware of departures from the correct procedures, there simply was not the oversight and corrective action we would have expected. From banking and elsewhere, Ireland has too much and too painful a history of those with an oversight and regulatory role being too invested in the system and its reputation to take the necessary corrective action to save the system when it comes under challenge, as all systems do in this country. In every respect, the TUI's deeply held belief that teachers should not assess their own students for state certification purposes was upheld and indeed reinforced. It is as though calculated and accredited grades allowed us to open a door a crack to see a howling gale outside. That door needs to be slammed firmly shut, Minister. The introduction of permanent change along the lines so unceremoniously announced carries enormous and unnecessary risk. No, Minister, we urge you in the strongest terms, direct your and your department's energies elsewhere. Do not ask us to co-design, co-construct, co-author, co-concoct, co-half-bake that which is anathema to us and which will not work. By all means, pursue the excellent recommendations of the NCCA. By all means, provide the resources that will make them work. By all means, proceed with the one reform that may be the most important one of the CAO system, where much of the dissatisfaction directed at the leaving certificate properly belongs. Avoid the mistakes of the past, Minister. Turn away from what would be needless dispute. Leave teachers to teach and examiners to examine. On that basis, you will find us constructive partners to build a good future. Thank you.